Emotional pain is rarely born from the event itself. It arises from the soul's refusal to surrender to what is. If you seek to break free from the endless repetition of emotional suffering, you must first awaken to a radical truth that many spend their entire lives avoiding. Suffering is not caused by external events, but by the resistance you hold within. This resistance, silent, invisible, and deeply embedded in the psyche, keeps you bound to the very pain you wish to escape. Most people remain trapped in a subconscious loop of inner war, unknowingly reliving the same emotional wounds over and over, mistaking their suffering for fate, when in truth it is self-perpetuated. Carl Jung, whose work illuminated the unseen forces of the human spirit, captured this principle with piercing clarity. What you resist persists. This is not merely poetic wisdom. It is a spiritual and psychological revelation capable of altering the way you experience life itself. Pause and reflect. When something painful disrupts your world, a betrayal, a loss, a failure, your emotional reaction is valid. Anger, sadness, fear, confusion, these are natural responses. But the prolonged suffering, the soul-deep ache that lingers long after the event has passed, is not born from the wound. It is born from your refusal to let the wound heal. It is the internal voice that cries out, "This shouldn't be happening. I can't live with this. This is unfair." That inner resistance becomes the very chain that binds you to the past. That is the moment pain transforms into psychological torment. The human ego is designed to seek order, control, and safety. It hungers for predictability and recoils from discomfort. Yet life does not bend to our expectations. It flows according to laws deeper than logic, rhythms beyond our grasp. And when life refuses to match our image of how it should be, the ego revolts. It resists, it clings, and it suffers. Take the heartbreak of a lost relationship. The raw pain of separation may pass with time, but the suffering that lasts for years, those obsessive thoughts, the endless reruns of old memories, the aching belief that things should have turned out differently, that is not caused by the loss itself. It is the refusal to surrender to what is, the refusal to let go of what has already dissolved. The same applies to betrayal, rejection, failure. It is not the event that breaks you. It is the unwillingness to allow reality to be what it is. This is the beginning of your transformation. To stop wrestling with life and start listening to it. To stop controlling and start observing. Because only in deep spiritual acceptance does the cycle of emotional pain begin to unravel. And only through that unraveling can your true self emerge. So how do we interrupt this unconscious loop, this cycle of self-perpetuating pain? The key lies not in resistance, not in force, not in numbing, but in a spiritual principle so profound and yet so often misunderstood: radical acceptance. This is not the same as defeat. It does not mean you approve of the event, that you condone it, or that you felt no pain. Acceptance is not resignation. It is inner realignment. It is the moment when you stop waging a futile war against reality and redirect your energy toward what can actually evolve. You stop clinging to what has already occurred and begin to reclaim the only true power you've ever had, the power to respond with consciousness rather than react in suffering. Acceptance is not passive, it is fierce. It takes more courage to face life as it is than to fight it as we wish it to be. And when you embrace what has happened, not because it is pleasant, but because it is already real, something alchemical begins to unfold. The burden grows lighter, the suffering loses its edge, not because the pain disappears, but because you have withdrawn the fuel of your resistance. The psyche begins to heal when it no longer has to hold itself in tension. Consider the example of someone who has just been fired. If they hold on to resentment, replay every moment of injustice, and remain loyal to the wound, they risk staying trapped, dragging this pain like a chain into every future endeavor. But the moment they ask, "What now? What can be created from this?" they awaken. They step out of victimhood and into authorship. The pain becomes a turning point, a teacher. This is what Carl Jung meant when he emphasized integration. that even our most painful experiences, when faced and assimilated rather than repressed, become the soil from which wisdom grows. One of the greatest errors we make is believing that our suffering is exceptional, that no one could understand, that our pain is uniquely unbearable. But suffering, Jung reminded us, is the common thread of the human story. Everyone suffers. The difference is not in the depth of pain, but in the way we meet it. Some resist and remain imprisoned. Others accept and step into transformation. Jung's timeless insight echoes here. What you resist, persist. The pain you push away will find other ways to return, through the body, through relationships, through unconscious choices, until it is finally acknowledged. The real liberation does not begin when the event ends. It begins when you stop holding on so tightly. It wasn't just the breakup that broke you. It was the story you repeated about what should have been. It wasn't the betrayal alone that wounded you. It was the grudge you nurtured long after the event. It wasn't the lost opportunity that paralyzed you. It was the refusal to release your fantasy of how life was supposed to go. When you finally loosen your grip on resistance, suffering begins to dissolve. The pain may remain for a time, but its claws no longer pierce the soul. The agony turns to insight. The wound becomes a doorway. This is not forgetting. It is remembering who you are beneath the pain. And that remembrance is what transforms torment into a lesson, not a life sentence. Now we approach the depth most never dare to confront. The hidden architecture of the unconscious mind that silently binds you to cycles of pain. Because once you understand that suffering is not born from events, but from resistance, you are naturally led to ask a deeper question. If I already know this, why do I continue to suffer the same emotional wounds again and again? And this is where the veil begins to lift. For when you illuminate this hidden mechanism, you begin to realize that you are not powerless. You are simply unaware of the forces within you shaping your path. Keep going, for what we are about to uncover will change everything. It is not the universe that condemns you to pain. It is not life's cruelty, fate, or misfortune. It is your unconscious mind, silently directing your experience through patterns laid down long ago. As Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. These are not poetic words. They are the central key to liberation. If suffering feels cyclical, if pain appears to re-enter your life uninvited, it is not because you are cursed. It is because the same unresolved wounds keep calling for your attention. Your unconscious is not your enemy. It is a loyal recorder of your earliest emotional truths, truths that were formed in the shadows before you had the words to name them. If you grew up in chaos, your nervous system became calibrated to chaos. If you knew love as conditional, you now confuse pain with affection. These scripts weren't chosen, they were absorbed, and they are now the hidden software running your life. Not because you want it, but because the unconscious does not crave happiness. It craves familiarity, even if it hurts. This is why you sabotage joy, why you chase what wounds you, why you attract familiar betrayals and echo the same heartbreaks. The unconscious pulls you back into the emotional weather patterns of your childhood, not to punish you, but to give you another chance to awaken. But as long as these patterns remain invisible, you will call them bad luck. You will say, "Why does this always happen to me?" And in that question lies the answer, because it is you who repeats what has not yet been resolved. Have you noticed that the same story keeps unfolding? The same type of person appears. The same internal drama plays out, no matter the external form. This is not coincidence. This is emotional gravity. It is not life doing something to you. It is your subconscious drawing the familiar into your orbit. And if you learned that love equals pain, you will unconsciously seek that pattern again and again, not out of desire, but out of recognition, because the unconscious confuses pain with safety when pain was your earliest teacher. So how do we begin to break free? The answer is not resistance, it is awareness. You must bring the unconscious pattern into the light. Begin with radical self-honesty. Ask, what emotion defines my life? What story am I still telling myself about who I am and how the world must be? When you answer from the soul, not the mask, you will see that the suffering you thought was external is a mirror reflecting what has lived inside you all along. This is where change begins, not with escape, but with revelation, not with denial, but with truth. Emotional freedom is not the absence of pain. It is the end of involuntary repetition. You will still feel, but you will no longer be a puppet. And from that place of conscious choice, you will stop recycling your pain and start reclaiming your power. That is where the real journey begins. And now we descend further into the labyrinth of the self, to the place where the ego, that ancient architect of illusion, silently governs your suffering. To liberate yourself fully, you must begin to understand how this inner entity sustains the very pain you long to escape. The ego does not heal. It does not evolve. It defends. It clings. It survives by feeding on your wounds. And unless you recognize this pattern, the ego will go on sabotaging every step you take toward emotional freedom. Carl Jung described this process not as mere self-improvement, but as a total restructuring of the psyche. He said, "The mind that creates the problem is not the same mind that can solve it." This is the essence of the work ahead. You cannot heal with the same consciousness that created the wound. The ego is not a villain, but it is a ghost. It is a voice woven from your fears, your disappointments, your longings for justice. It tells you that you are right to be hurt, that you are justified in holding on to resentment, that others must change before you can find peace. But this is a trick, a loop, a spiritual trap. The ego feeds on stories of betrayal, of injustice, of how you were never seen, never chosen, never loved as you deserved. It does not seek truth. It seeks identity. It thrives when you define yourself by your wounds. And each time you replay that story, each time you say, "This always happens to me," the ego grows stronger, wrapping your pain in the armor of familiarity. The tragedy is this: the more you identify with your suffering, the more you become loyal to it. The ego convinces you that your pain is who you are, and thus letting it go feels like losing yourself. And so you stay, a prisoner in a narrative written by your past, blaming the outside world, waiting for an apology that may never come. But as Jung knew, what you resist persists. The ego resists reality, and in doing so it binds you to suffering. The ego's deepest illusion is that the solution lies outside of you, that you need something, someone to heal you, and this illusion keeps you waiting, stuck in the valley of powerlessness. But no one is coming. No savior, no rescuer. Your healing will not arrive from the outside. It must rise from within, from the soul's decision to stop playing the same tape of pain. To dismantle the ego is to begin the sacred act of inner liberation. First, observe. Watch the voice in your mind without reacting. Witness how it clings to old wounds. See it for what it is, a survival mechanism, not a truth teller. Second, stop feeding the story. Each time you rehearse your suffering, you give it breath. Ask, does this story empower me or does it enslave me? If it weakens you, release it. And third, do the opposite of what the ego wants. Where it demands reaction, offer stillness. Where it whispers vengeance, offer understanding. Where it calls for control, surrender. The moment you begin to see the ego clearly, its spell begins to fade. You stop needing to be right. You stop craving validation. You stop fearing the silence. And in that quiet, something extraordinary happens. You no longer need the pain to define you. You remember who you were before the world told you who to be. And you see, at last, that your suffering was never born from what happened to you, but from the story you believed about what it meant. Now you are ready to choose a new story. And now we arrive at one of the most alchemical truths of emotional healing. Pain is not vanquished by resistance. It begins to transmute only when it is embraced, not with bitterness, but with conscious presence. This is the sacred knowledge that modern life neglects to teach us. From childhood, we are conditioned to avoid pain, to flinch at discomfort, to wear strength as a mask and bury our vulnerability beneath layers of denial. Don't cry, they said. Be strong, they repeated. And so, we learn to suppress, to compartmentalize, to silence the ache inside. But what we resist persists. Carl Jung's words echo with piercing clarity. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Pain that is denied does not vanish. It descends into the depths of the psyche, where it festers. It hides in the nervous system, in the tightness of the chest, in the tension of the jaw, in the shortness of breath. Repressed pain morphs into chronic anxiety. It becomes silent rage. It numbs your joy, steals your sleep, and whispers through your behaviors without your awareness. The more we avoid our sorrow, the deeper its roots twist into the soil of the unconscious. And like a shadow denied, it follows us, not to harm, but to be acknowledged. You see, pain is not your enemy, it is your messenger. When you tell yourself not to cry, not to feel, not to fall apart, you are turning away from the very gateway of transformation. You busy yourself with noise, work, screens, distractions. But the psyche waits, and when the silence returns, so too does the pain, louder, deeper, more desperate to be seen. You may point outward, blaming others, resenting the world, insisting that your suffering is their fault. But the truth is sobering. Pain projected cannot be healed. It is only through inward gaze, through honest and unguarded confrontation, that the cycle begins to shift. It is not the pain itself that breaks us. It is the inner war we wage against it, the belief that we must not feel, must not break, must not be vulnerable. That is the real torment. The path forward is paradoxical yet simple. Allow the pain, sit with it, let it rise. If sadness comes, let the tears fall. If anger arises, breathe into it, observe it. Do not push it away. Feel it ripple through your body as a wave that was always meant to move, not to drown you, but to pass through and release. In that conscious permission to feel, something remarkable begins to unfold. The monster shrinks, the storm softens. The agony begins to loosen its grip. What once felt unbearable becomes bearable, only because you stopped fighting and started listening. And here lies the most liberating truth of all. No feeling is final. No emotion lasts forever. Each is a wave, rising and falling as nature intended. But when you resist, when you clutch the story that gave birth to your suffering, you extend what was meant to pass. Healing does not wait in some distant future, nor does it arrive when your circumstances change. It happens now, in the exact moment you stop running from yourself and dare to sit in the fire of your experience, wounds and all. This is the beginning of true transfiguration. The raw, quiet revolution that turns pain into wisdom, darkness into depth, and sorrow into sacred self-acknowledge. Carl Jung spoke profoundly of inner transformation, and at the core of this alchemical journey lies one of the most liberating truths the psyche can uncover: impermanence. Nothing remains fixed, not joy, not sorrow. Life moves in cycles, ever-changing, like the turning of the great wheel. Just as pleasure rises and falls, so too does pain. It is not eternal. It does not define the self. It is but a wave within the vast ocean of being. Recall the last time you were submerged in hardship. Perhaps it felt endless, like the sky had collapsed into your soul. You may have wandered through a long night of the spirit, weary and convinced you would not emerge. But you did. You are here. And though bruised, you carry the wisdom of that descent within you. The same holds true now. Whatever you are facing, it too shall pass. The storm will soften. The sun, as it always does, will rise once more over the landscape of your heart. But the question remains: how do we stop being slaves to suffering and instead become alchemists of our own pain? The answer is not force, it is presence. The first step is this: release judgment. Do not label your pain as wrong or weak. Do not overanalyze it, dissect it, or turn it into a puzzle to be solved. Simply allow it to be. Let it move through you like wind through an open window, without resistance, without shame, without story. It is not a curse. It is an experience, a wave in motion. Second, return to the body. When grief, rage, or sorrow arises, do not retreat into mental spirals or old narratives of unworthiness. Instead, anchor your awareness in the physical. Where is the emotion living inside you? Is it a tightness in the chest, a trembling in the hands, a burning behind the eyes? Breathe into it. Observe it like a sacred ritual. Do not run. Do not numb. Simply witness. Third, let the breath become your guide. When the pain threatens to overtake you, breathe. Not to suppress it, but to stay with it. Let each breath become a lifeline, a tether back to your inner self. This is not passive endurance, it is active awareness. And something miraculous begins to unfold when you choose to meet pain this way. You realize that you are not powerless. You are not broken. You are awakening. The pain may still visit, but it loses its grip. You are no longer its hostage. You become one who moves through fire with grace, not because the fire spares you, but because you have learned not to fear its heat. This is where true power lives, not in armor, not in denial, but in radical acceptance. Most people will spend a lifetime fleeing discomfort, masking their wounds with distractions, addictions, or false strength. But the soul cannot be deceived. It waits for your courage. And when you finally turn inward with eyes wide open, when you stop resisting and meet your pain with honesty and reverence, you begin to see clearly. Suffering was never your enemy. It was your initiation. It came not to break you, but to awaken you. And once this is understood, not just intellectually, but at the core of your being, the fear dissolves. You begin to transform. Now the journey deepens, for when resistance ends, a new possibility emerges. Pain becomes not just something to endure, but something to evolve through. This is the sacred art of transmutation. You begin to turn your suffering into strength. This is the alchemy of the soul. And now, the threshold stands before you. The path diverges, but the power to choose lies entirely within your grasp, for you have seen the truth. Pain is not your enemy. It is the sacred flame that, when faced with courage, forges the soul into something indestructible. At this very moment, you are being invited into the deepest of alchemical choices. You can continue clinging to resistance, remain entangled in the illusion of helplessness, and relive the same emotional story where life is something that happens to you. Or you can transmute that very suffering into the raw material of awakening. The first path leaves you bound. The second sets you free. Which will you choose? If you are ready to transform your pain into power, to reclaim every fragment of yourself and rise whole, write it in the comments below. I transform my pain into power. These are not just words, they are a declaration, a psychological ritual of rebirth. Because once you choose this path with your full being, not just with your thoughts, but with your presence and action, something irreversible happens. You cease being a passive recipient of life and become its conscious co-creator. Your pain no longer owns you, it serves you. In the end, it is never the pain itself that breaks us. It is the story we tell about it. The resistance, the refusal to sit with it, feel it, learn from it. But as Carl Jung so powerfully reminded us, you cannot awaken unless you first hit rock bottom. And now, having touched that depth, you are no longer asleep. The truth is alive within you. The choice is no longer theoretical, it is embodied. So will you continue to let pain poison your thoughts, fracture your spirit, and shadow your vision of what is possible? Or will you take the braver road? The road where pain becomes your ally, your teacher, your crucible for transformation. You are not here by accident. You are here because something ancient within you is ready to rise. The past no longer defines you. Your wounds are not chains, they are keys. Once you stop resisting and begin listening, the cycle ends. And in that moment, you do not just survive. You evolve. You become the master of your destiny, not its victim. If something within you stirred while hearing this message, do not let it fade. Share it with someone whose soul might also be quietly crying for awakening. And if you feel called to continue this inner journey, this unraveling of old patterns and quiet rebuilding of self, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Remember this, love is not a treasure waiting to be found. It is a sacred fire you learn to tend within, patiently, consciously, and with great care. And that act of inner creation begins not tomorrow, but in this very moment. Thank you for walking this path with me. You are not alone in this. I'll meet you in the next video where we go even deeper. Until then, stay awake and stay true.